Welcome to the Total Soccer Show and our review of the first CONCACAF Nations League failure in USMNT history. Sorry, Taylor. Thursday's 1-0 defeat at the hands of Panama at SoFi Stadium. We'll be asking what went wrong, what, if anything, went right, and how we move forward as we head towards 2026. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today, hi, Taylor Rockwell.
Boo, soccer. Boo. That's my feeling today. That was my feeling last night. It continues to be my feeling this morning. My daughter woke me up asking how the game went. Did your team win? And I said, no, they did not. And she said, oh, can you make me breakfast? And so on went the day. So I'm excited to be here chatting with you all with a toddler reminder that soccer's not that important, but it is also simultaneously very important and depression-inducing. Fun times.
Okay. I'm getting an idea of the sentiment we're going to face going forward in this show. Very good, very good. Joe Lowry, how are you?
Yeah, I am well. I did not have that same toddler experience, which I think is both to my benefit and to my detriment in different ways, because I can see that being a helpful back to reality moment for Taylor, and the same as it would have been for me. My takeaway, because Taylor and I did the Quick Take Hot Take show last night, my takeaway is that I wasn't depressed enough on yesterday's episode, so I'm going to be bringing in that energy in droves today.
Go. And also bringing some energy. He didn't have to stay up too late because he didn't get extra time last night. Graham Ruthven. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. Yes, I guess I was relieved in a sense. I did go to my bed immediately after full time, so I wasn't on the hot take, quick take episode, but I did awake in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom to messages from Taylor. I sometimes forget about the time zone difference, and so my immediate reaction was, wow, Taylor is really mainlining this rewatch through the night.
That was correct, even with
intricate tactical thoughts at 3:30 in the morning.
I think I still sent them through at like 12:30 at night. I'm fairly confident that's when they came through.
So you were still mainlining that rewatch.
Yeah, a little bit. And I'm not as depressed as it might sound. That's fun. That's a good way to start. It's just more so watching this game again. The U.S. just weren't bad. It's just Panama weren't particularly great either. It's just sort of, they were just like ho-hum. It was just a lot of very safe passing and slow gameplay, and they never really got out of second gear. I don't think Panama had to really either. And so I think that was the thing that was most alarming to me, is just how lackluster of a performance it was.
Yeah, was indeed. Before we get into a full deep dive into this game and looking forward, listener, if you haven't listened to that half-hour quick reaction show on the feed, please do so already. Some very good stuff from Taylor and Joe immediately after full-time last night. Taylor, you mentioned that I would likely be either sarcastic or half-engaged in this show. The good news is I'll only be one of those things, half-engaged. No sarcasm from me today. So, is that good? Maybe that's good. Maybe that's
I don't
worse.
believe that.
I just don't believe you. Yeah, exactly.
We'll see how it pans out. Anyway, and also patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. If you want to join our community and chat in our Discord about this game and many others, that's the best way to do so. Bonus episodes and video on there as well. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. All right, so it was a 1-0 for Panama, a 1-0 win for Panama, I should say. The team that, of course, Poch beat 2-0 on his coaching debut with the US in October. It's a failure in Poch's first competitive test with this team. And it's Panama have now become the first team in the 7-year history of this competition to prevent the US from winning the tournament. I mean, Joe, a great moment for Panama, but a bad game overall for the US and the neutral. Now you've had a few hours to sort of percolate with this one. Yeah. Perhaps even a rewatch. I think maybe both of you have done a rewatch at this point.
Berhalter out.
Sagely nodding along with that one. Where do we land? How are we feeling any different from last night, Joe?
Yeah, like I said, I'm feeling worse about this game than I did last night. I already felt pretty bad about it. The baseline here is this was a winnable game for the United States, not just in that they have more talent than Panama, but also in that they did create more chances. The problem is the U.S. didn't create very many chances. That was a huge issue all throughout this game. I think this game was worse than I sort of thought it was last night in the quality of chances that I referenced on the show last night, while few and far between were even less high-quality moves than I thought they were. There's the Sargent shot that is through traffic that gets blocked and then hits off the post. There's the McKennie header, and then there's the Ajaman shot late on. None of those are like gilt-edged chances. None of them are just amazing moments for the United States. This was, I guess I disagree with Taylor. I thought this was just a downright terrible performance from the United States, where they were listless in the attack, and I think there are multiple factors for that, from the players that were on the field to Mauricio Pochettino himself. They were so horrible in the press for long stretches of this game, like comedically so. I pulled a bunch of clips, and we can talk through some of those things later. This was not a good game at all for the United States. And I think there are lots of places to look. I have my thoughts on the order of priority of those places and the order of blame, but this was rough all the way around.
Yeah, I'm struggling to think of anything that we can pick out of this as a meaningful positive. Maybe that nobody was there to actually watch it inside the stadium. That's potentially a positive.
That didn't help.
There's a lot of Mexico fans, to be fair, Graham.
Yeah, I mean that whole. I'm joking about
Just
it.
in
That whole situation is a farce, right? That's on CONCACAF rather than a statement of US fans or anything. The way that they bundle those two tickets together, it's just like blatant price gouging, where they know that Mexican fans will pay the bumped up price and they justify it by saying, well, you've got 2 tickets, but they don't actually want the second ticket. So anyway, that wasn't ideal. But I'm struggling to think of anything as a positive out of this match. I guess if you look at some of the numbers from the game, it does paint the US as somewhat unfortunate. They did have more of everything, more possession, more shots, more big chances. They had 3 big chances compared to Panama 0. But having watched this game live, as we all did, and I also did a little bit of a rewatch as well this morning, I don't think this was a hard luck story for the US. I think it raises questions about the player pool, again, about the balance of the group, maybe even the attitude of some of those players in these sorts of matches. I think it raises for the first time questions of Poch. This wasn't a good match for him at all, and I do think he was on the back foot from the moment Anthony Robinson pulled out. I called that a disaster on Wednesday, and quite frankly, I think I was right about that. I think without him, the balance had to change, the framework of the team changed, but nonetheless, the adaptations that Poch made for this game and made in response to that were not good. His in-game changes were not good either. And this was meant to be, well, in personnel, but in nothing else, really. We can come on to that later. But this was meant to be the game to showcase how far the US had come. Panama, I know, Ryan, you said that they've already beaten Panama in that friendly match, but it was a friendly match, wasn't competitive. Panama are a bogey team for the US, didn't knock them out of, but beat them at Copa America, which ultimately knocked them out of that tournament last summer. Lost at the Gold Cup in 2023 to Panama as well. So this was meant to be a statement game for the US, and instead we got more of the same old problems.
Yeah, and I think that is where both of you are correct. Perhaps I'm being overly emotional when I say, they weren't terrible. I think what I mean, because they were bad, they were uninspiring, the biggest thing they were was boring. And that is I think the worst thing you can be when you're trying to get people engaged in soccer and when you're trying to show that this is the start of a new thing or we're moving to a new evolution. Because I think when you're bad, you can have fluke moments. Alvin Jones can hit a ridiculous volley that nobody saw coming. You can have who's Dos Santos? You can have Gio Dos Santos completely dribble through your entire team and just be next level for a day. And it can just be a bad result, a bad performance, a bad collective performance. When it's just boring and dull, I find that to be the most disheartening. And so much of this game was me driving in traffic because it was just me at the screen saying, go! And everybody was just so slow and slow to step and slow to try to do anything in the attacking realm. And it made me wonder if they were concerned about getting countered, if they were concerned about their speed, if they didn't have ideas, if they didn't individually know how to make things happen. But it's the type of game where it's so dull that you walk away thinking, are we a lot worse than I think we are? Is the state of American soccer a lot worse than I think it is? And I don't truly think it is, but it's just the type of game that I think I find the most disheartening to watch and certainly to rewatch again.
Yeah, the U.S. were boring in this game. You're spot on there, Taylor. The thing is, they were also bad, right? You can be boring and bad at the same time, and I just think that's an important distinction
Not a great
to make.
combination, really. It's
not a great combination to make. It's also not... It's not the primary job of these players or of the coaching staff to play entertaining soccer, right? You can go and look at teams that smother games. England won so many games under Gareth Southgate playing horrible, boring soccer. So you can play boring soccer and be really good. The problem is the United States can't play boring soccer and be really good because they don't have that attacking talent to do all of that. For me, we're talking about the tempo of the game, and that was a real issue for the United States in this match. And you and I talked about it a little bit last night, Taylor, where the U.S. seemed to operate really slowly in so many different ways. They seem to operate really slowly in possession in terms of their ball movement, which you just cannot afford to do against Panama's super deep 5-4-1 block. Breaking down a low block is hard on its own. You don't really need to make it harder for yourself by lacking that sort of tempo. The U.S. was sluggish, I thought, in possession. The U.S., I thought, was sluggish in the press, which I've referenced already. And I thought they were really sluggish in the counter press. And Pochettino agreed with those things. Reading through his comments from after last night's game, he had a really consistent theme, and that was effort. He said, you need to show, and you need to come here and be better, and suffer and win the duels and work hard. If not, it's not going to be enough. That's quote one. The other quote that I want to hit at is, quote, if we look at the duels won, it's clear that we lost those to Panama. When the game is played in tight spaces where recovering possession means you're in a 1-versus-1 situation and you're disorganizing the opponent, when possession is consistently won in the final third, that's always going to favor a team as organized as Panama. I think those are great points from Pochettino. The U.S. seemed to lack some effort in this game. Tyler Adams talked about how they weren't competitive enough after this match. You can see why Poch loves Tyler Adams so much. I think effort was not at its peak in this game for the United States, and their counter-pressing was bad, right? You go through and watch this game. There's sequence after sequence. I have one down in the 23rd minute where the reactions are just so slow from the United States after they lose the ball. And Poch is right. That's a great moment to pounce on the ball. Panama are starting to break forward, and this is the whole point of the counter press, right? You press the counter. You press the opposition's team's attempted counterattack so that they're starting to break out of their shell. You win the ball right back and bang, you go and attack space. The problem is, all of those things were issues for the United States. My opinion is that none of those things were the primary issue for the United States. I think in a game where the U.S. has 60-odd% of possession and creates nothing, essentially, I think the issue is that their chance creation wasn't enough. I think the issue was that their possession play in the final third was not enough. The U.S.'s primary issues were not effort-related, in my view. They weren't tempo-related either, although maybe they were in possession. I'll take that back. They were not effort-related. They were in the final third, and they were quality-related, and they were personnel-related, and those issues did not get changed from minute 1 to minute 90, whatever.
Yeah, and that leads us on to what is a huge personal related talking point, Joe, which I know is where you want to get us to, and I think it's entirely fair. The Reyna Luna elephant in the room. Neither player comes off the bench in this game, which is frankly unbelievable. To watch that game, to see the issues the US was having and getting through. I have to believe Poch saw those issues as well. And then not to turn to either of those players. Like, I could kind of understand Reyna's coming into the camp for the first time. He's not coached them before. I could understand if he's thinking, well, I don't know this player as much. But he had Diego Luna in January. He's in form for RSL. To not turn to him in that situation? Yeah. I don't get it.
Well,
I had this theory on Wednesday that we were going to see an evolution of this team, and that's why we saw both those players coming in. And yeah, that Poch wasn't interested in any evolution here in this game.
And with Luna, it's not as if Poch wasn't willing to trust a newcomer, right? Jack McGlynn, who wasn't even in the original roster, comes into this game, and if we're looking for a positive, it was that Jack McGlynn, I think, was quite good in his minutes off the bench for Tanner Tessman. But it's not that he wasn't willing to trust an MLS guy. It's not that he wasn't willing to trust somebody who had only been in January camp. It's not even that he wasn't willing to trust someone that was in this camp for the first time in a real way. That whole thing was just bizarre to me. And there's two ways to go here. One is, why didn't Pochettino put in a central playmaker that the U.S. so sorely needed in this game, which is still where my mind goes first and foremost with all of this. I just do not understand. And the other is, well, the U.S. still has enough talent on the field to go and break Panama down. That's true. And I'm not trying to let the players that were on the field off the hook and heap all the blame on the manager. I think that is far too simplistic of a view for all of this. But two things really can be true. And I honestly believe, when you look at the sample size we have for the U.S. men's national team over the last several years, there's a pretty simple calculation. When Gio Reyna is not on the field, against a low block, the U.S. often struggle to create chances. A year ago, the U.S. are playing Jamaica, almost to the day. The U.S. are playing Jamaica in the CONCACAF Nations League semifinals. Gio Reyna is on the bench. The United States create virtually nothing. Gio Reyna comes off the bench. He plays 2 through balls. The U.S. score 2 goals. They win that game 3-1, and they go on and win the Nations League final. That's been the story. It was the story against Germany, where Gio Reyna in the first half of that October friendly was excellent. He comes off the field, the U.S. suddenly can't create chances anymore. It was the case when Folarin Balogun starts and plays his first games with the U.S. also in the Nations League, and Gio Reyna and Balogun developed that really nice early connection. The U.S. has a Gio Reyna problem. It's that they truly need him too much, because we saw it in this game, and this is where there's blame to go around on the other players, and a realization of where the pool is right now, period. The U.S. don't have somebody, if Poch especially isn't going to play him, the U.S. don't have somebody who can be that central playmaker, and the U.S. felt that in a real way last night.
I mean, even if Poch doesn't want to, if he's got a theory that we don't quite know yet of why he didn't want to put those two players on, and he didn't want to play through Panama for some reason, why not try and play around them? So I'm thinking in this match, and Taylor, this relates to what you messaged me in the middle of the night about with the 3 deep centre backs. The US
release the tapes. Show us the tapes, Graham.
I will. I'll keep that for the Patreon.
Are we calling them the P tapes because of what you were doing while you were listening to them? Sorry.
Not while I was doing this, Ryan. It was on the little shelf that I've got in front at the back of my toilet. Anyway, the US in this game they didn't need three. They didn't need three centre backs. They certainly didn't need three deep centre backs. That could have been a 2 with 2 outside fullbacks high and wide. So even like Max Harston would have been an option I could have got on board with. I would have understood the theory there. Or Marlon Fossey, something to stretch the pitch as wide as you can. By the way, that is a talking point. Is how narrow this pitch was. I think I underestimated how much of a factor that would be when we did our preview episode. But nonetheless, you get boots on the chalk, you stretch it as far as you can on both sides. Maybe you open up a yard or two in the centre of the pitch for someone to exploit. But the changes that, not only did I not like the lineup, the changes with Poch, it was light for light, right? It was McGlynn for Tessman, Agman for Sargent, McKenzie for Richards. Obviously, Agman is a different sort of player to Sargent, certainly. But it was just a different interpretation of the same position, right? There wasn't any positional change in those alterations. So throughout the match, I just found it really baffling.
Yeah, and I love, Grim, that you brought it wider than just Gio and Luna. Although that is like that's the thing from a personal perspective in this game. Poch talked about after the match how there was a chance that those guys were going to get in extra time, and again,
that was weird.
I saw that quote what's happening at that point, right? It doesn't make any sense.
What that was about.
So clearly those guys weren't in the plans for this game, right? Poch says that they're going to have a chance on Sunday, and I'm sure he's right. I'm sure they'll play some on Sunday. But it wasn't just those guys, right? It was the fact that not just Arsene, but also Marlon Fossey. If you were looking for a more traditional outside back to get high and wide, both of those guys were left on the bench. Brian Gutierrez as well, another more attack-minded midfielder who could have done something in this game. Not that I'm expecting any of those guys that aren't named Gio to really change this game because we don't have the sample size for them at this level. But that's all quite curious to me. And then you get into the lineup that Pochettino actually picked, which we haven't talked about yet. Matt Turner's in goal. You have defensively, this is how the U.S. set up. You have Yunus Musa at right back. You have Ream and Richards in the middle. You have Joe Scally shifting over to left back, I think maybe for the first time with the USMNT. And then you have the midfield line of Weston McKennie on the right side in the first half, and Tyler Adams and Tanner Tessman, and then Tim Weah on the left, and then Pulisic and Sargent at the top of that 4-4-2. And the possession shape would change in the first half, and into the second half too, where you'd have one of the fullbacks stay a little deeper, that was Joe Scally, the other one would push forward. We've seen this before from the United States. But really, honestly, truthfully, are any of us so surprised that the U.S. struggled to create chances with a double pivot of Tyler Adams and Tanner Tessman, with Weston McKennie in the second half playing as basically a pure number 10, and with Joe Scally and Yunus Musa at fullback? I'm not. Maybe I should be a little bit more surprised. I'm just not. It was a wildly conservative lineup, and a lineup that played wildly conservative in a very, very predictable sense for 90-plus minutes of this game.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, more on this game and its individual moments and looking ahead for what this team looks like under Poch. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to our review of Panama's 1-0 win over the USMNT in Los Angeles, California. Taylor, to come back to that lineup that Poch picked, I think maybe not the one that many would have chosen, maybe not the... What did you see here, basically? Let me phrase it like this. Let me phrase the question to you like this. Was this progression, regression, or stasis for this team? By that, I mean, if I'd have told you that Greg Berhalter was on the sideline for this game, if you didn't know who the coach was, would you have bought that? I think I would have.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if it had been Berhalter, it would have been regression. I think with Poch being there, it was stasis, which itself is regression, which makes sense to me. I hope that makes sense to everyone else. But I think that's where some of my frustration and emotional consternation comes from, is the feeling that Pochettino is going to come in, he's going to kind of cut out the stuff that clearly wasn't working, that was overly convoluted. He's going to get them playing a more simplified, stripped-down way that will still get them possession, that will still get them goal-scoring opportunities, but will have some of that kind of hard-running, hard effort that we've come to expect from the U.S. And so to watch this performance and see very little of that was extremely disconcerting. And so in that way, it's something that we have at times come to expect from the U.S. under Berhalter. I would say at times unfairly, but in this game, I think it's more than fair to be really frustrated by the way this turned out. I do think he has some limitations with that lineup, given the injuries to Dest and Jedi Robinson, given the injuries to arguably the starting number 9 and then the backup number 9. So in comes Josh Sargent, who I don't think did himself many favors.
Way to get out of having to rank those players, Taylor. That's well done on your part. That's just top class work.
I try. And I think Joe is correct that with this lineup, it's a conservative lineup. You're not really going to get a ton of individual creativity outside of maybe Christian Pulisic, and I think that was a huge part of the game plan, is get the ball to Weah wide and see what he can do, or get the ball into Pulisic's feet and see what he can do. Where I started to get increasingly frustrated as the game went on, and this is what Graham has referenced. I texted Joe these thoughts as well, but Joe was maybe... it was still like daytime when I was texting Joe, I think, so maybe less invasive.
He was having his morning coffee, I think, Arizona time.
But I think, like, what I kept seeing, and there's a moment that I sent you both, it's 69:58 on the clock. The U.S. are taking a throw. It's on the right side, thank you, and Adams receives it. The throw is taken by Yunus Musa. It's thrown like 15 yards back. There is no one really like within 10 yards of Tyler Adams when he receives this ball, except for the two U.S. center backs who are maybe 15 yards, 10 yards even deeper. And that really, like, I just sat there and stared at that screen for a moment trying to figure out why that was bothering me. And what I realized is that better teams who are pushing to win the game or trust themselves in possession and on the ball push that midfielder up, and it's the center back receiving that throw. And you have all of your outfield players more or less within 40 yards of the goal. And what that does is, obviously, it gets you more players into attacking positions, but it also means now Tyler Adams can go stand on a man and push him backwards or pull him out of position. Or you can open up those little gaps that somebody can attack, but if the ball spills loose, you have a teammate there to step and win it that much more effectively. To Joe's point, the U.S., I think because they are slow to close down and slow to be tight in possession, when they lose it, they can't really counterpress effectively because they're stretched out, because there's that extra 10 yards to cover, that extra 5 yards to cover. And so they end up retreating almost at times instead of trying to counterpress and win. There's, to my mind, one 10-minute period or so when they actually do commit numbers forward, keep them forward, and press somewhat effectively. One of the moments that Joe spotlighted of being not good pressing was in this period of time, but it's when they create their three chances from like the 19th minute to the 24th minute. And that is when they have numbers forward, they're committed to attacking positions, they are committed to winning the ball high and then putting it back into play and trying to create uncertainty in Panama. And that was the only time, or those are the only times that Panama did seem like they were getting pulled apart. Did seem like they were a little bit unsure of their positioning. Outside of that, the U.S. just wasn't adventurous enough. And so to see them not be adventurous in the 30th minute, but then continue to be cautious and conservative in the 80th is where it really started to wear on me.
So to what extent is that a player problem, and to what extent is that a Poch problem? I mean, you have to bear in mind, like, the players are tired. Many of them have had to travel 8 or 9 hours out of their time zone they do their day job in. Can we give any dispensation for that? I mean, I think Joe used terms like they were unadventurous, slow, uninspired in last night's show, which is true. So how much is that Poch, and how much is that the players who are just not with it? I am not
attempting to fence sit because that would be uncomfortable, but I will say it's both, because I think if you are Poch and you want your team to be more aggressive and win the duels and counter press and take chances, you've got to be the one waving them forward. You've got to yell at Tyler Adams, leave it, go forward, let Tim get that ball, let Mark get that ball, whomever it is at that point, Chris Richards. Like, you can tell them push up, push up, push up. But I also think there are limitations in the squad. You've got 37-year-old Tim Ream in there, and I do wonder if maybe part of this is we don't want to get into a foot race. We don't want to get caught too far forward because we know he's not going to win that one. So we'll stay a little bit deeper and just protect ourselves that way. But I think you're then sort of ceding ground in terms of your attack and your intensity. And then I think some of it is just an American mentality. And this is the other part of my extended rant. I think for so long, Americans playing in Europe have been one of two things. They have been goalkeepers or they have been role players. And like, with very limited exceptions, most of the time when you have an American playing in Europe historically, they have worked really, really hard. They have done what is asked of them, but they have never been the name in a team. Steve Cherundolo is probably the greatest example of that. But Michael Bradley when he's playing there, Josie Altidore when he's playing in Europe, like the Clint Dempsey season or two when he is unstoppable for Fulham, I think that's why that looms so large. Even when he doesn't really win any silverware, it's still one of the few times an American was like the man for a Premier League team. The Great Escape under Fulham and Brian McBride. That's another example where he is remembered as like the guy who was scoring goals for Fulham. But for the most part, I think Americans are looked at as don't make obvious mistakes, don't stand out in a bad way, work really, really hard, be the guy who makes the pass that leads to the pass that leads to the goal. And now I think we're asking this team to be the guy who makes the pass, to be the guy who takes people on, to be the guy who scores the goal. And there is a mentality shift there that I think is really difficult, and that is intangible, and that is maybe a 1 a.m. musing, but I do think there's something to it, that if you have been taught to go in there, work hard, everyone's going to think you're American, everyone's going to think you're not good enough, so you've got to prove you've got the work rate, you've got the intensity, you can follow instructions, you can do what's asked. Now you're being told, hey, you got to create, you got to find a way to break down a low block, you got to take people on, you've got to be brave with the ball at your feet, you got to be brave in 1v1s when you're in possession. And those aren't really things that Americans always are tasked with doing and always kind of know how to do, I think. And there is a limited muscle memory in that way. And I think this game over and over again reminded me that we don't really have guys, with very few exceptions, 2 of whom were on the bench, that want that ball and want to take people on and want to try stuff. And I think there's just a little bit of bravery lacking in this team right now.
So, Taylor, you think that sounds like you think the ideology of this team is ahead of the personnel, right? So they don't have the players. Like, there's not much of a difference between this and past US teams, but the ideology is the thing that has run ahead of this team, and so the expectations are being placed on them that they can't meet. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so, because even somebody like Christian Pulisic, who I think from Milan at times this season has been asked to be the guy and take people on and score goals and get assists, he can do that when he also has personnel around him who are pushing up and giving him options. And when he loses the ball, there's someone there to win it right back and play it to him, and then he tries again. He can try to do that with the United States, but if he doesn't have everybody around him also sort of trying to do that same thing, it leads to a disconnect and it leads to a breakdown. And I think that is, I don't think he was good at all. I think in the rewatch, I think last night in the quick take, hot take, I was sort of like, I can't tell if he was bad or if he was just the only one trying stuff, and so he looked bad by comparison because he kept giving the ball away. He was pretty bad. He was pretty listless in some of his passing and decision making. But I also think he didn't have people around him who were making darting runs and aggressive runs to open up space and pull people out of position. And so in that way, yeah, I think there's an ideology there that we aspire to. I'm not sure we fully understand how to do it.
And is that then on Poch then to come up with a way that not to go to get swept along with the ideology, but to come up with a way? I mean, I think for this game, looking specifically at this game, there was a personnel issue that you're then relying on Poch to find some solutions to, and he didn't find those solutions. I think Yunus Musa is the best example of that. I thought he was one of the biggest problems in this game. So obviously no Robinson means Scally shifts to the left. Musa came back into the back four on paper. In possession, it's the 3 as we've seen before, but just with Scally on the left this time. Musa was Robinson is basically where I'm trying to get to here. The problem is that he's not suited to that role at all, right? He can't beat a man. He doesn't give you that funnel into the attack in the same way Robinson does. There was a moment in the second half where Tim Weah absolutely dusted a man on the left side.
59.
And it woke me up from my slumber, and I went, wow, that was like a bolt from the blue in this game. It was so out of place.
Graham, I have in my notes, I think it's the 59th minute, I have Tim Weah alive in all caps. So I'm guessing it was the same moment.
Yeah, totally. Like it woke me up. It was
alive, by the way.
It was so out of place in this game. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is that then surely is, that's why you hire someone like Poch. That's why you pay the $6 million a year, is the hope that he is qualified to find the right ideology for this team. And I think this game was a reminder that he's not there yet.
Yeah.
Sorry, really quick. I just want to say, yes, I think that is true. There is the moment in the first half when I think Sargent is unintentionally clipped as he's kind of trying to make a run in behind the U.S., get a free kick from about 40 yards out. Pulisic takes it and just hits it straight out of bounds for a goal kick, which is miscommunication, what have you. But they cut to Poch on the bench watching the replay, and I'm ready for him to, be like, oh, it's got to be this way, it's got to be that way. And he just kind of does the and then looks right back out at the screen with a vacant expression. And I was like, oh no, we're not even good enough to be mad at. like it was a very disconcerting moment in terms of Pochettino, I think, seeing this team for what it is and maybe not fully having answers as to how to elevate.
On Pochettino facial expressions, Taylor, there was, I think it was the Yahoo Match report. We had him doing this sort of like this face, like oh boy face that he was doing at the end of the game. Yeah. And I thought, is that the moment? Is that the moment where he realizes, oh, I've got a lot on my shoulders right now, and I'm not sure I have the tools to do this job. It seemed very. Yeah, that was disconcerting. I thought that image in itself. Actually.
I've said before that I grew up with teams where coaches yelled, and I am now maybe of the mindset that that's not always the best thing for an 11-year-old to be screamed at by a giant Northern Irishman. That doesn't always inspire confidence. However,
If they were just Irish, a different story. But
well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Then it would just be charming, I guess. But in this situation, my parents would always say to me, like, if your coach is yelling at you, it's because they know you can do it, and they're frustrated or they want you to do better. When they're not yelling at you, that's the problem. Because it means that then they've given up and they don't think you can do it. And this game last night was a lot of Poch not yelling, where I feel like maybe he would have yelled in the past, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, this game in a lot of ways is just a reminder. It's not anything new. It's a reminder of what the player pool is. Taylor, to go back to your point about the U.S. players being role players, not just in the past, but also now, right? These players are still role players at their clubs. Pulisic is maybe the only one, maybe. I think he probably is the only one who's broken out of that real category. The reason why they're role players for their clubs isn't because, in my view, they're American. I think it's because they can't do the things that you like to see from players that are going to be consistent difference makers in the final third, right? Weston McKennie is not a pure number 10. He's not. Yunus Musa is not a dangerous wide attacking option. Tim Weah is in the 8th percentile for successful dribbles attempted per 90 minutes among wingers and attacking midfielders in Europe's Big Five leagues. Like, these guys don't do that stuff. The U.S. haven't produced reliably the kinds of players that can, to use the same word again, reliably create chances in the final third. I mentioned the Gio Reyna problem that I've written about before. I've talked about it before. I feel like it's a meme at this point, but it's a real thing. The USMNT's Gio Reyna problem is that without him, they are listless in the attack, or at least, and this is the more precise way to say it, they're more likely to be listless in the attack. The group of players that Pochettino put on the field last night were good enough to create more chances than they did against Panama. Better play on the ball and possession would have helped with that. More of the combination play that we saw early on between Musa and McKennie, and between McKennie and Pulisic, would have helped with that. That faded very quickly as the game wore on. Better counter-pressing, as Poch highlighted after the game, with that conversation about duels and winning the ball back just as Panama are pushing forward. Then we can go and find the space against a team that's a little more disorganized. That would have really helped. Better pressing, where the U.S. are pressing in a 4-4-2 shape, and Tyler Adams and Tanner Tessman are sort of man-oriented and pressing up against Anibal Godoy and Coco Carrasquilla, the double pivot for Panama as they built out in a 4-2-3-1. Those two players would press forward. Panama would slip a winger in behind, and in behind the U.S.'s midfield line, so between the U.S.'s lines, and not a single U.S. defender in that back forward step to block them or deny them in any way. There are 6 opportunities. Like, I think I clipped 4 of them in a piece I wrote for Backfield last night. It's comical. Like, better pressing would have helped with that. Tim Ream talked about it after the game. It's the first thing he told Charlie Davies on the CBS broadcast, was that they needed to be more man-to-man in their pressure and needed to be a bit more aggressive in their pressure. That was a real problem. And Panama didn't exploit it because they're Panama, but a better team will, right? So all of those things would have helped, but really the reality is that this U.S. pool, especially the lineup that Pochettino put on the field, is just not good enough to reliably dominate games like this at home, right? The U.S. was still the slightly better team in this game in terms of chances. We talked about that already. Sometimes in a high-variance game, that's just not enough, and the U.S. did not have enough yesterday.
Joe, I am of the opinion, I would love to hear if you agree or disagree, that what you have just said is correct. However, you can't really rely on Gio Reyna to be the guy.
Totally agree.
And certainly Pochettino didn't last night. You can't really rely on Diego Luna. And so what I was then focused on in the rewatch was, okay, so what do you do? How can you create? Because you can't just sit back against a team that are 5-4-1 and be like, we can also sit back. None of us will attack. What will you do now, Panama? Oh, you'll do the same thing for the next 80 minutes? That's not going to get it done. And so the only thing I can think then is that you have to basically get everybody stepping forward and getting everybody much closer to goal, and then getting everybody really aggressively counter-pressing when you do lose the ball so that you can potentially catch Panama out. When you catch them in transition, the Sargent shot that goes off the post, I believe I'm correct in saying that's when the U.S. has a corner, Panama head it clear, and then they clearly have been instructed to, once you clear your corner, you then step out aggressively. You try to catch your opponent offside if they win the ball back, but if they don't, you chase it down and see if you can kind of apply that pressure. And that was the only time that Canada had 2 players fully committed at midfield, and when they are bypassed, now the U.S. can open them up, and that's where I think a lot of the joy came from, was quickly moving the ball. It's 1- and 2-touch passing down the right to open Panama up because you've caught them in transition. So that is a long way to get back to if you don't have those creative players who can handle that sort of load, do you then commit numbers forward and counterpress? Is that the best way to still try to create when you don't have those technical playmakers?
Poch seemed to think so, right? And I think there's a lot to that, right? That was the thing that Pochettino harped on most after the game, and I think he is correct to harp on those things. I think that is, like, I'm having a hard time with the premise of the question in this particular context, given who was on the bench. Like, it just doesn't. I honestly don't know how to answer that question properly in the reality, I guess, that we've made here, because Pochettino did have those players. Like, if I hate to do this, if Greg Berhalter had put the lineup that he put on the field last night and hadn't responded by halftime or hadn't responded by the 60th minute, he would have been destroyed. Not just on social media. He would have been destroyed on the CBS desk. He would have been destroyed on 2DNA. And Mauricio Pochettino did the very same thing. And sure, it was Matt Turner having a quite poor moment in goal where he's, maybe a half step, maybe a full step too close to the near post and doesn't get a good first step to explode across the face of goal. It's also a great finish from Waterman as well, to be fair to him. And a great moment afterwards.
It's such a good moment, and that has bounced around. Like, I've had that in group chats this morning. I've seen it on Sky Sports News.
Explain quickly. Run it through, Graham.
Yeah, so when the goal goes in, celebrates with Thierry Henry. The desk is like behind the advertising board, and so celebrates with Thierry Henry and shouts at him, "You're my idol, you're my idol," as the whole team kind of crowds around Thierry Henry. Thierry Henry, always good for a facial expression, just looks very surprised in this moment. It's an all-time celebration. Honestly, it is. It's right up there.
It's a great moment.
He could do like the Bugs Bunny eyebrows of like, well, this isn't going to be good, is it now? Like, he just has that quick turn to camera and eyebrow raise when Panama scores. And I was like, yes, Thierry, you've said a lot just by raising your eyebrows.
I love that. I feel like the Bugs Bunny voice was coming from you there, Taylor, and you backed out last minute. I wanted it. I really wanted it. But the problem, I think, first and foremost in this game was that Pochettino was just so wildly conservative with his lineup. And the reality that is unpleasant, but I think the reality that USMNT fans are dealing with this morning is that when the U.S. don't have one of their only central playmakers against a low block, they are unreliable. And that has been the case for years and years and years, even for multiple Nations Leagues. Forget all the other games surrounding these. It's a problem, and the U.S. pool just straight up isn't good enough for when you take one or two key cogs out of the middle of the field, out of zone 14, for them to reliably create and dominate in games like this. They're just not.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with that. Like, truthfully, what I'm asking you, though, is like, okay, let's say he did bring Reyna in. Let's say he did bring Luna in. I know it's, a thought experiment here. And the same problems persist because you don't have people making off-the-ball runs to open up those little gaps. You don't have kind of an intensity to it. I guess what I'm saying then is, so if they can't make a difference, is it just that, like, oh, well, we're going to draw this game at best? Like, is there no other option in your mind?
I mean, where was the space, right? A lot of the space was in front of Panama, and they needed to be drawn forward to then played in behind because there wasn't a lot of room for the U.S. to break through. So I guess maybe this makes for bad audio, and I apologize. I think I just disagree with the premise of that question, because I think if you bring in a Gio Reyna or a Diego Luna, you're going to combine more in central areas, and you're going to draw them out, and you're going to have Weston McKennie make that slip run, or you're going to have Tim Weah make that slip run. I have a hard time envisioning it not being at least slightly better. I'm not saying that Gio Reyna is the world's best superstar and he can take over every game. He can't. And the U.S. certainly should not be relying on him to do that because he's never healthy. And when he is healthy, Pochettino is dropping quotes about his attitude, essentially. This is the quote on Gio that I want to do real quick. This was to The Athletic, I think, in that roundtable that Poch did this past week or whenever that was in London about Gio Reyna that we referenced, I think, maybe on a show recently. But to read the full quote. Quote, "It's not only about knowing if he can play well. It's about knowing if he can create a good atmosphere in the team. That's going to be very important for us." That's concerning to me, especially after not seeing him play in this game. But I say that to just circle back around to the U.S. shouldn't rely on Gio Reyna. And so that's where I understand the premise of your question, Taylor. There would have been more juice, though, if he was on the field. I think there would have been more juice if Diego Luna or even Brian Gutierrez was on the field. I think you have better central combination play. I think there was some off-ball movement in this game. There just wasn't enough on the ball, and it wasn't moving quickly enough because the players that were on the field aren't ones you can rely on to do that stuff.
Yeah, taking what you were saying, Taylor, about, well, what do you do? And one of the things you sort of put forward was, do you allow them to come forward and play on top of you? And then linking it to Joe's Backheeled article, which I read, and Joe, your breakdown of the lack of pressing. I kind of wonder if the US was half-heartedly trying to do that, where there are some of the moments that you isolated in your clips where there's no pressing until all of a sudden Josh Sargent is like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. I'll kind of do a half-hearted press and sort of like it felt like maybe there was some sort of instruction there to allow Panama to come into the midfield from the defence so that you turn the ball over quickly in that congested part of the midfield and then move it forward into Sargent or Pulisic or whoever. But the part that never happened was really the counter-pressing in the centre of the midfield to then turn the ball over. So, I don't know, I'm just trying to put forward a theory of linking those two things that you're talking about.
All right, let's take one more quick break. When we come back, we'll look forward to this team and the third place playoff game against sworn enemies Canada and trying to find some positives here. Back shortly. Total Soccer Show, welcome back. Now, Graham, I'd like to try and find some positives in this C block of this show, but I'm going to do my Nancy negative bit as well, because overall, holistically, not just what happened on the field, I think the outlook's rough based on this game. Like a half-empty stadium with just over a year to go to the World Cup. Yes, it was in Los Angeles. Yes, it was 4 p.m. traffic.
Yeah, honestly,
to get there. But I had a friend who was there who was saying, like, you know, even towards the end of the game,
you have friends.
empty. A lot of people. I know I'm showing off now. A lot of people waiting for the game that followed it as well. So
yeah,
that in itself, culturally, and I know it's March Madness starting. There's lots of other things competing at this time as well, of course. But with a year to go, hosting a World Cup, I'm a bit disappointed at that kind of turnout and that being the cultural backing that the team has at this point. And then, of course, the stuff we've covered. It's a thin squad. It's a tired-looking team. It isn't necessarily doing Poch-esque things. We've got a keeper who doesn't get regular game time. 37-year-old defender for the world's greatest team, but still he's older. A second division striker who hasn't scored for the national team in over 5 years, I think the stat is. And then coming in for him, a young MLS striker who's only just starting for his MLS team, who missed a bunch of chances. I'm trying to find the positives, Graham, but it seems a bit glum at the moment.
Yeah, look, I said at the top of the show I'm struggling to find positives as well, but I'll try and address, I'll try and talk you down from some of those negatives there, right? So I think from a hosting point of view, I'm not worried about that at all. 4 o'clock on a Thursday. LA as well, I mean, I think has a bit of a reputation for late arriving crowds as well. $150 was the cheapest ticket price. They bundled the two games together. It seemed like Mexico fans had bought up the majority of those games, so they're not going to come for the first match, right, for the supporting act, especially if it's one of your rivals or your fiercest rivals. I'm not worried about that at all. The World Cup
is cost, Graham. If there's a $150 ticket, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I know. That is ridiculous. Like, we talk about ticket prices. That is ridiculous for a ticket. But anyway, the World Cup is its own thing. I'm not worried about that at all. You talk about the team, right? This performance is concerning, and I find it concerning just from the lack of evolution standpoint. But we've got Jedi Robinson to come back into this team. We've also got Sergino Dest to come back into this team. So we're talking about 2 attack-minded fullbacks coming in. That in itself might make a difference. Ryan, I'm trying to think what else you went through there. Adjaman was a young MLS striker. Well, when everyone's fit, he's not coming on the pitch. He might not even be in the roster when everyone's fit. That's Balogun or Pepe that's coming into that game, or they're starting in this game, and it's Josh Sargent that's coming off the bench. So, look, I am worried. This team doesn't seem to be making steps forwards, but equally, I don't know if in this match there was a big step backwards. It was just more of what we've seen, right, over the last few years, certainly since the last World Cup.
Yeah, and maybe to say that in a different way, Graham, because I agree with, I think, literally every word that you just said. It's that Mauricio Pochettino isn't a fix, right? He isn't a fix for all of these problems. These are familiar issues, right, that we've talked about on this show before. Maybe the pressing thing was a bit odd, right? And some of the lack of defensive intensity in the way that we saw it in this game was not quite normal. But I'm mostly willing to give those things a pass. At least the horrific pressing, I think I'm willing to give a pass as sort of a one-off. But these attacking issues are super familiar. And the hope was that you bring in Mauricio Pochettino, that his tactical acumen and his experience and his quality as a manager would help improve the United States, that it would make them better with or without a more attacking midfield type, or with or without these really effective attacking fullbacks in the U.S., or without all of those things by choice or by force on Thursday. And the reality is it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter that Mauricio Pochettino was on the sidelines for this game. And I just bring that up to, again, I guess bring us all to reality. I think we're all here together, frankly. It's a reality check of where this player pool is. And at their best, I think the U.S. looks a lot better in this game, right? At their fittest. in terms of player availability, I think they are better in this game. But it's unfortunate and a reminder that truly that like coaching hires only matter so much. And until the U.S. has better players, and it helps if your coach is willing to play some of those guys. But until that is the case, these games are going to pop up. And the hope for the United States is when they kick off their World Cup campaign in 15 months or whatever it's going to be at the same field where they were playing last night, SoFi Stadium, the hope is that they look better than this and that it's not one of those games like we saw yesterday where it is just lifeless.
Taylor, let's look forward to the weekend. Third place playoff against Canada. With Mexico, of course, beating Jesse Marsh's team last night as well. What do you realistically want to see different in this approach and in this team? Goals would be nice. That would be a good start, right? I guess.
Yes, goals would be good. I would like to see one of two things. I would like to see a more dominant but enjoyable possession game from the United States in which they kind of force Canada back. They control the tempo. They're finding options. They're finding passes. They're creating opportunities. And so what we saw against Panama that didn't work clicks, and maybe Gio Randa's in there, maybe Diego Luna's in there, and it is better. Maybe there's a little bit more pressing. Maybe the numbers do step a little bit more aggressively, and we see that change. That would be one thing. If we can't see that, then I want to see the U.S. work, and I want to see the U.S. fight, and I want to see them win a physical, scrappy, potentially ugly game. Because my fear is that Jesse Marsh is certainly going to be motivated to beat the United States. He can't stop talking about the United States. And so I think he has a point to prove. I think he will have this Canada team up for it. And whereas for the United States, it's the first time they haven't contested the final. It's a bit of a failure. I think for Canada, it's an opportunity to beat the United States and to kind of show that maybe they are more of a competitor. Maybe they are more on top of the U.S. right now. And so what I really don't want to see is the U.S. go into that one, be sort of plotting, be sort of conservative, and have a physical, up-for-it, high-tempo Canada beat them. My assumption would be comprehensively if that's the way the game goes.
Yeah, I would like to see the things that I wanted to see from last night's game. We didn't really get to this on Wednesday's show, but I had noted down some of the things that I wanted to see from the US in that game. I looked back at them this morning. Quickness in possession was one. Centre forward involved was another. Consistent chance creation was another. And then the last bullet point was a win, because I thought it was really important to get that final against Canada or Mexico, so there goes that dream. But the other things, but obviously we got none of those other things in this match. So Poch might shuffle. I hope he shuffles the pack, but ultimately I hope he achieves those things by shuffling the pack. I still want to see the same principles from the performance.
Joe, what do you want to see? Less badness, maybe?
Yeah, that would work. It's going to be a totally different game, right, in terms of how Canada play compared to Panama, where Panama sit in a super deep block, and Canada aren't going to do that. And Panama build with careful passes out of the back. Canada aren't going to do that. It's hard to imagine a more different game than the change from Thursday to Sunday is going to be for the United States. So a lot of the problems that they had in this game, the ones that I think were primary, even if Pochettino doesn't seem to totally agree based off of his comments yesterday, I don't think those things are really going to apply, because the U.S. will have space to attack into, and they're going to be attacking against a different shape, and they're going to have more room to find space. Now, Canada, I don't think are going to attempt to be the on-ball protagonists of this game, but we know how Jesse Marsh wants to play, right? We know how Canada wants to play. They will be aggressive, which means there's going to be more space for someone like Tim Weah on the left side, where if we're looking for takeaway, it's not a positive, but a takeaway. Tim Weah has played 2 times under Pochettino. He's played high and wide on the left wing both times. That feels notable, and maybe we'll file it away for later in one form or another, because when Jedi Robinson's back in the team, that does cause some congestion, right? Unless you're moving Jedi Robinson into midfield, which we have seen as well. I think it's going to be a totally different game, and it's one that really should suit the U.S. better. On Sunday, it's going to be a game where if the intensity isn't there, the U.S. will probably lose that game. And in this game against Panama, the intensity really wasn't there in a real way, and they still have to look even elsewhere to see the other issues that played into it. But if you don't bring that intensity against Canada, you're going to lose that match. And this should be the U.S. game, where they're up for it. It's the scrap. They don't have to do all the hard final third stuff, or nearly as much of it. The U.S. should be set up to play some good ball on Sunday. We'll find out if they will.
Let's find out indeed. Let's park this one here, shall we? As Joe notes, we will be back on the feed to talk about that game and much more coming shortly. But for now, Taylor Rockwell, should we have a hug? Yeah.
Yes, I would like to end on an even more negative note because I would just say
great.
the final
cool.
thing. There's one more thing I do want to say, like here, because I think for me it's kind of important. This is the first time I have been like Matt Turner not playing minutes might be a problem because I do think he is certainly not fully to blame. Tim Ream doesn't cover himself in glory on the goal. Joe Scally doesn't really close down at all. But Matt Turner is way too close to the near post, and then he's trying to time his goalkeeper hops in the steps of the attacker so that then as the attacker is planting to shoot, Matt Turner's feet are set. But his timing is off, so his feet are in the air when the shot is taken, so that then he has to lunge for it, but he's never going to get full extension. He's never going to be able to cover that one. And more worrying is that it felt like he was baiting the shot to go into the far post, and it does. So to me, that is a sign that the goalkeeper's positioning is off and his timing is off, which means he is not playing regularly to the point where he is sort of automatic in that moment. And so it's the first time I've thought, maybe it should be somebody who's starting every single game starting for the United States. So we'll see how that changes. We'll see how that progresses. But that is one more thing I wouldn't mind seeing against Canada is maybe Zach Steffen or Patrick Schulte in goal.
Yeah, it had me thinking maybe those coaches who haven't put Matt Turner on the field maybe were onto something, maybe? I don't know.
Nah, they're wrong. They're still wrong.
Yeah, okay. Just more minutes, that'll be it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Taylor, we'll be back on the feed very soon. Thank you very much indeed for your services to this here podcast. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, it was fine. That was good. It was great to talk it out with you all. It's always therapeutic to talk it out, to watch it again, to figure some things out with you all, and to see Graham's lovely orange shirt brought literal brightness to my day.
Oh, there it is. And you can see it, listener, by the way, if you follow us on our YouTube channel. Link in the show notes. Graham Ruthven, thank you very much, you orange beauty.
Thank you, Ryan Bailey. My shirt bringing brightness to the three of you, and also the fact that Scotland won. I presume that picks you up as well. Ryan, I know you were really excited about that Scotland win away to Greece as well. No, have I got
Yeah,
that
I
wrong?
definitely followed that. And just remember, listener, by the way, the international breaks only got a week left after that.
Yeah, I mean,
It can't
you
hurt
would have to be a
anymore.
really bad team to be relegated from the Nations League and lose to Greece. Oh, why did I say that before Sunday?
Right, you had to go there, didn't you? We almost got out of this international break. We almost did it. There we are. Never mind. Joe Lowry, you're my idol. You're my idol. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I can't do the facial expression, so I don't deserve it. Ryan, this was fun. Thank you.
Listener, thank you very much for joining us on this one. You have yourselves a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on the feed very shortly. But for now, bye.